Hi everyone, this is Joe Crawl with your weekly update for the Society of St. Sebastian. This week we're going to be talking about parental involvement legislation. This is some legislation that has a lot of history within the pro-life movement and has made some serious good inroads with respect to protecting human life and helping establish a culture of life. First, a little background. When it comes to parental involvement legislation, we see a huge need, and there was a huge need, especially after Roe v. Wade became law of the land in 1973. As I've said in past videos, when Roe v. Wade became law of the land, basically what happened, any sort of prohibition whatsoever on abortion was completely wiped clean. And as a result, what you had was a situation in which young girls could go get an abortion without their moms or dads ever knowing. And this was an unfortunate situation. This is what we would call as a violation of the principle of subsidiarity. And I'll talk a little bit about what that principle is here in just a moment. But also what happened was it created a situation in which men could sexually abuse young women and then get away with their crimes as well. That's a serious situation and something that desperately needed to be looked at. Again, this was all wiped clean. And so in 1973, this is what happened. Young girls could go in, not inform or even tell their mom and dad that they were getting an abortion. And yes, adult men could have sexual relations with minor girls and get away with their crimes if they got pregnant. No one was the wiser. And so what happened is obviously the pro-life movement saw a need to limit these particular evils. And so they come in and they begin legislation. Interestingly enough, when we look at the history of parental involvement legislation, it actually started in the late 70s. And throughout that time, up until this point, we have roughly 36 states that have some form of parental involvement law on the books. So we still got 14 more states to go. Also, there's a huge attack that's going on in Illinois right now. Some legislators want to revoke and repeal their current parental notification legislation. Well, all that's going to do is go back to the evil situation that we just talked about. Parents don't know, and sexual predators can get away with their crimes with minor girls. That is unacceptable. Let's talk a little bit about what happens with parental involvement legislation. First thing to know is there really kind of three different types of legislation when it comes to parental involvement laws. You have parental notification, which just merely notifies the parents. You have parental consent laws that where either the mom or the dad or mom and dad have to consent to the invasive surgical procedure. Or you have a combination of the two, a parental notification / consent law that may be on the books, where both the parents are notified and they have to give consent. And the various 36 states have these types of laws dealing with it. Now, let's address parental notification here real quick. Parental notification, as I said, informs the parents. And it gets the parents back involved, and that's an important sort of aspect when we talk about that. Now, while it doesn't give the parent a veto power, it does at least allow the parent to become involved in the conversation. We got to remember, and if you remember just a few moments ago, I talked about the principle of subsidiarity. And the principle of subsidiarity, at least from an ethical and philosophical standpoint, is a very important principle for the stability of society. And basically it says that a society of a higher order does not need to interfere with the functions of a society of a lower order, especially if that society of a lower order is operating just fine. So, for example, states do not have the right to infringe upon parents' rights. Why? Because the family, which is a lower unit, if it's functioning just fine, they don't need to be infringed upon. It's only when that order, that lower order, becomes dysfunctional that maybe the society of a higher order might need to step in. So cases of like child abuse and stuff like that. Well, this obviously isn't the case in general. Most parents have the well-being of their child foremost in their minds. And so this is one of the big needs to address. And that's why parental notification at least takes a first step by notifying the parent with respect to their minor daughter who is thinking about an abortion procedure. And at least it gets them in the conversation, and the parent can at least try and has the opportunity to try to save his or her grandchild from the abortion procedure. We know that parental notification laws work. We've seen it in states, especially in Texas, where there was a drop in the teen abortion rate when its parental notice law was passed back in 1999. Interestingly enough, let's move on to parental consent laws. Parental consent is just kind of a step above the whole idea of parental notification, where literally a parent has to consent to the procedure. Again, this really kind of helps restore the rights of most families when it comes to this particular issue. Why? Because one, typically speaking, when it comes to any sort of health care, any sort of medical procedure whatsoever, the parent has a say-so. The vast majority of laws out there dictate that. Abortion was kind of a weird thing when it came to that. And so now when a state passes a law that has parental consent, it certainly restores that full right to parents to simply say, hey, we don't think that this is appropriate for you at all. This is not a good medical procedure. This is not appropriate care, and so forth. It certainly gives the parent the ability to say no. Finally, you have those laws, for example, that are a kind of combination thereof. And so they both notify and give that parent the ability to say no. Again, those are interesting laws. And again, it helps restore that right of the parent to be able to help decide what kind of health care, medical care that their daughter receives. One of the first things that we ultimately need to realize, though, when it comes to this subject is that abortion isn't health care at all. Abortion isn't medical care at all. It's the destruct killing of an innocent human life. And that's a problem. That's not health care. That's not medical care. That's something entirely different. That's the unjust killing of an innocent human being. And so we need to fundamentally understand when it comes to abortion, abortion is not a right because rights imply duties. If I have a right to do something, that means someone else out there has a duty to let me be able to do what I have a right to do. And there is no duty to kill innocent human life. It simply doesn't exist. And so we need to understand that this sort of legislation helps give parents the ability to simply say, no, you do not have a right to kill your unborn child. This is a serious situation. We can work this out as a family. And, we can help, respect life, respect the life of this unborn child, and still work through any various problems that we have. We need to be a society that loves, not a society that's willing to destroy. And I think that's one of the big things when we see parental notification, parental consent sort of bills out there. It helps establish this idea that as a family and as a society, we need to come together. Lastly, one of the things I'd like to say is that it also helps move society away from the idea that abortion ought to be acceptable. If abortion isn't acceptable in the circumstance for a minor, it helps society begin to realize that abortion is not a good in general. And so it's helping society move away, and again, incrementally help society understand that abortion is a horrible moral evil and that we need to get rid of it. And so I think in this respect, when we pass laws like this, it helps establish this idea that abortion is definitely a moral wrong. Well, guys, I appreciate everything. And again, we're going to link a donation button down below. Everything you do helps us out, helps us get these weekly updates out every week, our Sebastian's Point every week, and certainly our quarterly journal. So please help us out if you could with that. Give us a big like if you enjoyed this video. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We appreciate everything. We want to get the message out there. And thank you for listening. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about parental involvement legislation. If you have a question, post it down in the comments, and I will get back with you. Thank you so much. Have a blessed weekend. God bless.